السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. مرحبا بكم جميعا to another class of فتح المعين. نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى أن يكتب لنا ولكم التوفيق والسداد. بسم الله. So in our last class we stopped at where the author speaks about الزباد or الزباد, and I gave everyone a task to locate or determine what this thing is. And for the opening, inshallah ta'ala, we'll begin with that. So let's begin. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyid al-Mursaleen. Nabiyuna Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahabatihi ajma'een wa ba'd. Our author here says, وَالزِّبَادْ طَاهِرٌ. What is the zibad? It is a type or from the family of cats. It's referred to as the civet. C-I-V-E-T, if I'm not mistaken. And it is طاهر. The animal itself is considered طاهر. ويعفى عن قليل شعره كالثلاث. And a little bit of its hair is excused. Why is it excused? Why is this random cat-like creature excused? Because they get certain perfumes from it. As a matter of fact, it's still used till today. It's called civeton, okay, or civeton in some dialects. And it is added to perfumes. It gives a type of musky aroma. تمام. كذلك أطلقوه ولم يبينوا. This is what they stated. They said it's ma'fu, but they didn't specify, he says, what is the ma'fu. أن المراد القليل من المأخوذ للاستعمال أو في الإناء المأخوذ منه. Did they mean that it's excused, meaning in the amount of liquid that I take or in the container I'm collecting it in? Where is this excuse that they're referring to if there's a few hairs in it from this animal? تمام. قال شيخنا, meaning Ibn Hajar said, والذي يتجه الأول إن كان جامدا. Meaning what makes sense, it's from where they're taking it from. So when they're collecting the sample. تمام. He says لأن العبرة فيه بمحل النجاسة فقط. Because the issue here would be in where it's coming from. It's an excretion, tamam, from the private area. So the issue here is in the private area, so the afu would be connected to that. فإن كثرت في محل واحد لم يعفى عنه وإلا عفيا. However, if there's a lot there, or a lot of hair there in that liquid, then there's no afu. You would need to remove those hairs. He says, and then if you can do that, خلاص. بخلاف المائع فإن جميعه كالشيء الواحد. This is based upon what? This is very important to understand. When we broke down water, we said a small amount of water, large amount of water. We said less than قلتين, قلتين and above. This only applies to water. This cannot apply to anything else. This is why he says بخلاف المائع فإن جميعه كالشيء الواحد. Now, he's not going to expand on that anymore, but we will see in the furu' that we have coming up after this segment that this issue will reappear, and that is if a liquid gets najasa in it, it is treated as one thing no matter the amount of liquid. If I say it's ma'fu, I'm good. If I don't say it's ma'fu, then the entirety of that liquid is considered what? It's considered najis. تمام. فإن قل الشعر فيه عفي عنه وإلا فلا ولا نظر للمأخوذ حينئذ. He says ونقل المحب الطبري عن ابن الصباغ. المحب الطبري quoted ابن الصباغ واعتمده, and he asserted it, أنه يعفى عن جرة البعير ونحوه فلا ينجس ما شرب منه وألحق به فم ما يجتر من ولد البقر والضأن تمام إذا التقم أخلاف أمه. Pause. Now that he gave an example to najasa being in a liquid, and it's not going to be excused anymore because that liquid is not water, and therefore if najasa has fallen into it, khalas, there's no more af. But if small amounts of najasa, then that's ma'fu. Now he's shifting his language to speak about other liquids. One example that he's giving us right here from Al-Muhibb al-Tabari quoting Ibn al-Sabbagh and asserting that that is the mu'tamad is جرة البعير تمام and ما يجتر به. So with ba'ir, with animals like cows, like sheep, like camels, they do all of their activities with their mouth. They take food in and they bring food back out again. They vomit on a regular basis, things that are not supposed to be in there, things that they cannot digest, and so on. Not only that, some of these creatures even bring parts of their organs to their mouth and hang it out like camels. This then begs now a question. Is this vomit najis? Because if you say yes, then guess what's going to happen? They vomit all the time. And it doesn't even look like vomit most of the time. It just looks like they're just bringing food back up, and they might even look like they're chewing it and then they're just spitting it out. You can't tell. In other words, there's no way for me to measure it and document, okay, well, they did it this time. It's just not possible. We're not talking about a ball of cat hair that a cat spits out every few weeks. We're talking about they could be eating and stuff from another meal, they bring it back up and they spit it out. What do we do with this? Well, the Shafi'i, they say, هذا يعفى عنه. This is going to be what? This is going to be excused and overlooked because there's no way to control it. And there's that theme, again, that I mentioned in previous classes. When things get complicated, what do? We see the fuqaha automatically going to the af. Tamam? He says, sometimes if the younger animal is still breastfeeding from its mother while grazing too, it's going to spit up. Okay, and if it's breastfeeding, its mouth that has spit up, right, has vomited somewhat of its food, returned some of its food, its mouth, if we say it's najis and it went to go have breast milk, and then I want to go and get some of that milk and collect the milk. If we say it's najis, then the milk technically, if we're looking at it in a technical sense, the milk is coming out touching a mutanajjis, and liquids are not like water, therefore that milk is mutanajjis. That's if I'm looking at it technically. But due to the necessity, we have to say it's excused because there's no way to control it. تمام. كلما ضاق الأمر اتسع. That's a قاعدة in fiqh. Like, for example, you can't stand in prayer. What do? You sit. You can't sit in prayer. You lay down. Can't lay down. You're on your side. You can't do it on your side with your ass. What's happening? You can't make wudu. You do tayammum. You can't do tayammum either. Then you pray and you make it up later. Every time in the Sharia you reach a dead end or something that is just not going to make sense anymore, the Sharia automatically flips it to something else. And we have this theme throughout the Sharia. So if X is technically the build-up, the structure of it, its premises, therefore lead to a conclusion that I can't maintain, then the fuqaha will automatically say, this must be excused because it cannot be maintained anymore. Tamam? He says, وقال ابن الصلاح يعفى عما اتصل به شيء من أفواه الصبيان مع تحقق نجاستها. Well, you know who else vomits a lot? Babies. Usually has to do with gas after they had milk or a bottle or breast milk and so on. That's why you have to they'll say you have to burp the baby, right? You have to help the baby release the gas, or else they'll start spitting up. And some of them don't even, it's not even a gas issue, they'll just spit up. Tamam, هذه مشكلة. This is a problem. Why is this a problem? Because if we say, as we've said before, that vomit is najis, and now this is a liquid, no exceptions of the water, what do we do here? The technical response would be that vomit from that baby is considered what? Najis. So, okay, we considered the vomit najis. I'm not going to brush the baby's teeth. I'm just going to clean up the mess, right? Okay, so I cleaned up the mess, خلاص. Because you can't do afwa of that. There's a mess of vomit everywhere. Even if you said it's afwa, it's still disgusting. You want to clean it up. طيب, what about the mouth of the baby? تمام? So, here Ibn Salah is saying, تحقق نجاستها. I know for a fact that the najasa went through it. But it's معفو عنه. And see, they say even صبيان. So they say children. Because that might not be controllable, even if they're toddlers. Until they're in tamyiz, really nothing is controllable, right? The whole entirety is a work in progress. Whether it is them going to the restroom and they're still potty training, right? And sometimes even in early stages of potty training, and especially with boys that know how to urinate, they won't clean themselves. So you run into these things where there's tahaqquq. There might not be yaqeen, but your best assumption is that it's probably not clean. You have to have we have to take afw into consideration. And therefore, even though you have that tahaqquq, we're still going to say it's okay, you can carry your child in the prayer. Because it's ma'fu anhu. Tamam? He says, وَأَلْحَقَ غَيْرُ بِهِمْ أَفْوَاهُ الْمَجَانِينَ. People that are mentally insane or mentally challenged. They might vomit things. They might have something that's najis. So there's tahaqquq. When they say tahaqquq, that's not yaqeen. It's my best judgment is their mouth is not clean. Tamam? That's my tahaqquq. There's still going to be afwa here. It's not yaqeen, meaning that, well, I mean, they could have had a sip of water. They could have had something else and it washed it down. Right? Scenarios are endless. But I have tahaqquq. Baby just threw up. Okay? You didn't check the mouth, but what do you think? There's probably some residue in there. Well, if vomit is najis, then their mouth is what? Najis. That's tahaqquq. Tamam. But what about if it's yaqeen? It's not going to matter. Because even with tahaqquq, right, I'm treating it as, yes, it is najis. So yaqeen is not going to change anything because, yes, it is najis. Tamam. However, if you have that yaqeen, meaning you know it's there, you know your toddler son, his underwear might not be 100%. And you have yaqeen of that. You saw it. Here, this will impact something like prayer. Okay? Why? Because now you're yaqinan hamil in najasa. But if you have tahaqquq, then you don't have yaqeen, so you carrying them is not necessarily the same. قال وجزم به الزركشي. As a matter of fact, they actually went as far as the clothes of a butcher. They said the clothes of the butcher, يعفى عنه, as long as you don't see the blood everywhere. Tamam? Why? Due to necessity. You're not going to ask him to change 16 times a day. كلما ضاق الأمر اتسع. Tamam? Every time things get too narrowed out, when they don't make sense anymore, automatically you'll see the fuqaha saying, nope, we're going to open up the door. But this then brings us to a mas'ala, very important mas'ala. If that's the case, wouldn't the perfumes with alcohol in it be okay because, that's what's available everywhere? No, because that's a luxury. There's no diq here. Is there oils? Yes. Then that's a luxury then. There's no shortage of oils anywhere. So no, you can't make that leap there because that's luxury. While these examples we're giving, these are you can't just sit there all day long washing out your baby's mouth. That's not practical. Or you can't be working, for example, in a mental facility and going around washing the people's mouths. It's not practical. You can't be a butcher, even though you wear your apron, you have plastic on you to keep your clothes safe, and then a drip of blood here, a drip of blood there. Then you have to keep on changing your clothes all day. It's not practical. So that's the difference between these scenarios. Because when do you see the hardship is when the practicality has reached a dead end. It doesn't make sense anymore. However, if it's a luxury matter, no, we're not going to come and say, well, it's okay. Ahmad bihi al-balwa. La, that's not going to work. And you're going to see this as we're continuing to read in these furu' and details coming up. No. You need an actual thing that is causing you an extreme hardship like the butcher. تمام. طيب. He says وكميتة from the najasat as well is a mayta. However, this is معفو. ولو نحو ذباب مما لا نفس له سائلة. So this is najis. Mayta is najis. However, from the mayta that's معفو is an insect نحو ذباب, like a fly. مما لا نفس له سائلة. What does this expression mean? This means if I were to get a knife and cut my arm, you're going to see blood gushing out. But if I did the same exact thing to an ant, does anything happen? No. That means that my body has a feature that their body does not, and that is gushing blood. That's basically what they're saying when they say nafsun sa'ila, gushing blood. When something is cut, it starts bleeding out. Now, normally we mention this to what? Or we apply this to what? We apply this to insects because that is a feature in most insects. However, if you remember in the list that I gave you, right, we mentioned other insects. Now, see, he says al-dhubab, which is flies. Why are we mentioning flies? Because the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam said, إذا وقع الذباب في شراب أحدكم فليغمزه ثم لينزعه فإن في إحدى جناحيه داء وفي الآخر شفاء. If a fly falls into, and I want you to pay attention because the Shafi'iyya are going to pay attention. إذا وقع الذباب, a fly falls in. You didn't throw it in, you didn't push it in, it fell in on its own. This is going to matter for a faqih. This is going to matter for a faqih. If a fly falls into your drink, dip it in, then take it out and toss it. For in one wing is an illness, and in the other wing is basically its antidote. Whatever it might be. Tamam? In one of the narrations it says, فَإِنَّهُ يَتَّقِي بِجَنَاحَهُ الَّذِي فِيهِ الدَّاء. When it is falling, and it's dying, right? It's falling in, it relies or uses as a shield the wing that has that ailment in it. So you're pushing it back in to make sure that the water soaks up from the other wing that also has the what? The cure for that ailment. Mumtaz? طيب. Shafi'iyya said here that if it was najis, if this was najis, then the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam would not tell me to dip it in further. He would have told me not to dip it in further because the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam has never ever allowed or encouraged or suggested the spread of najasa. So it's not najis. Why isn't it najis? The unique feature in the fly is that when you pull it apart, it does not gush out blood. So for the Shafi'iyya, they said what? Not the wing feature, because the wing feature that's going to be unique to the fly, that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, al-dhubab. However, that other feature, the reason why it's not najis, it's going to share that feature with other creatures. Like what? Like lice. Lice is insects that suck on your blood in off of your scalp, under your hair, right? They put their eggs around the strands of hair, and they live there, and they are a pain to get out. Tamam, found in many countries in the world. Now with lice, if you crush them, unless they have just fed, normally you're not going to see anything. There's not going to be a liquid. They'll crack in your fingers like ants. Imam al-Shafi'i, he mentions in al-qaml. He says, that's going to be similar to the dhubab. I'm going to treat it the same way as najasa ma'fuwa anha. It's najis, but there's an exception. Al-zambur, firefly. Tamam. Al-aqrab, scorpion, same thing. I mean, not firefly, dragonfly, but firefly would be the same thing. Tamam. And them ants, Ibn Hajar mentions it. Bees, Ibn Hajar mentions it. Fleas, Imam Shafi'i mentioned it. And I already have the full list. I gave it to you on Telegram, and I translated it for you, so you can follow through and see who mentioned what for the most part. Things that I did not mention a name on is because too many people mentioned it. Wasn't uniquely stated by anyone. So all of these insects are najis, but they're ma'fu anhu. They're excused, and that's something a lot of people tend to not understand. Tamam, is that when we say ma'fu anhu, it doesn't mean that they're no longer najis. They are still najis. It's just that they're simply najis that are excused. Tamam, excused for what? For the hadith, could be qiyas, could be an understanding that is present, and so on. He says, ولو نحو ذباب مما لا نفس له سائرة خلافا للقفال ومن تبعه, as opposed to al-qaffal and those that followed him. في قوله بطهارته لعدم الدم المتعفن. Al-Qaffal and some others of the Shafi'iyya, they said, no, these insects are tahir. This is not a najis that's excused. This is a tahir thing. كمالك وأبي حنيفة. Why did they say this? On the grounds that within their bodies, there's no blood. This is a problem. Why? Because there is still a substance in their body, in all of their bodies. Tamam. Some of them, like a fly, if you crush, there is a fluid that's there. It's just there's no gushing fluid. That's why you'll see them always say yasil or sa'ila. There's no that gushing and leaking out feature. But there's still stuff there. We're not saying it's not there. It's there. It's just not like human blood that will just spill everywhere if something was cut and ripped open. Their argument, but it's not actually blood. Doesn't matter. Even if it's not classified as blood, it's still the liquid of their life, so therefore it would be treated as blood. Tamam? So Al-Qaffal held that opinion, but the school did not agree with him on that assessment. فَالْمَيْتَةُ نَجِسَةٌ. All mayta, anything that has died un-Islamically. Well, we don't eat lion. Well, if the lion is slaughtered Islamically, does that make it not mayta? No, it would still be mayta, but not because of the slaughter, but because that it was not meant to be slaughtered to begin with. Tamam? Like the khinzir, like the kalb. Tamam? But nevertheless, every mayta is considered najisa. All mayta is considered filthy. وَإِن لَمْ يَسِلْ دَمُهَا, even if it does not have gushing blood. وَكَذَا شَعْرُهَا وَعَظْمُهَا وَقَرْنُهَا. Its hair, its bones, its horns is all considered najis. Tamam? This is very important. This is a very important concept to understand because a lot of people get this assumption that ma'fu means the thing is no longer najis. No, it is still najis. It's just an exception to certain things that are still najis. خلافا لأبي حنيفة إذا لم يكن عليها دسم. Meaning Abu Hanifa, he would consider these things clean as long as there's no flesh or fat on them. He would say if there's no flesh or fat on them, then they're considered tahir. For us, no. They themselves would be najas ayn. They'll be najas ayn. He says, وَأَفْتَى الْحَافِظُ ابن حجر العسقلاني بصحة الصلاة إذا حمل المصلي ميتة ذباب إن كان في محل يشق الاحتراز عنه. نعم, like you got a dead bug stuck in your pocket and you can't get it out. You've been scrubbing it, but time of prayer came in. Can I pray? Yes. Why? Because you're unable to get it out. Or let's say you put a chemical in your hair to kill the lice that have been in your hair that you've been unable to get them out. Now they're dead, but you need to wait for 3 hours until the solution is done. You had your wudu all along, so you still have your wudu. Now you have this chemical in your hair, the lice is not, some of them are dying, some of them are not dead, they're mayta. Can I pray? Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, he gave a fatwa and he said yes. Is this fatwa according to the Shafi'iyya? Because Shafi'iyya normally don't quote Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. Why is he quoting him here? He's just quoting him because the question didn't come up, and first came up, it came up to him. But for the most part, as long as the afu is stated and you're unable to remove it, all of the fuqaha would say you can go ahead and pray. Tamam. If you're unable to remove it. But if you're able to, that's a different story. He says, غَيْرِ بَشَرٍ وَسَمَكٍ وَجَرَادٍ, meaning the mayta of the human, and the samak, and the fish, and the jarad, and the locust are never considered what? Are never considered najis. Mayta of the human, so can I slaughter a human? I mean, if you did, it's still mayta, because you don't consume human. So you see, any animal that you're not meant to consume, or has not, or you're allowed to consume but has not gone through the process, is automatically considered mayta. Tamam? Well, why not the human? Because we don't consume human. Well, what about the people on YouTube that keep on saying the Shafi'iyya allowed to eat humans? I'll leave that for fiqhi dives and go through the whole history backdrop on that. It's a funny scenario, but as a sense of getting you excited, yes, some of our ashab said you could eat human flesh with certain requirements. No, we're not talking about opening up a restaurant for it. It's actually an apocalyptic scene. So we see most of the literature from our fuqaha is after things that had taken place in the Muslim world where people were literally getting kidnapped and eaten. So some of our fuqaha are, okay, well, if we say due to the necessity we can do it, how do we do it? So they start suggesting a process. Now, one might say, this is horrible. If you went through or seen what the Ummah went through when certain things happened in places like Egypt and Libya and Sudan and Iraq at different points in history, and read the gruesome details of people to the peak starvation points, what they went through and what people did because of the starvation, you'll have that understanding of like, okay, it makes sense why they would speak about this and why they would suggest this. Again, it's not a matter of mu'tamad, it's a matter of more of a suggestion to do if you're in some sort of apocalyptic scene where there's nothing to consume. Not dogs, not cats, not trees. There's absolutely nothing. What do you do? And it's really more of like ultimatums, like there's nothing for you to have. What do you do? So there's suggestions by some of the fuqaha. Inshallah ta'ala, our dives will begin bi'idhnillah ta'ala after Ramadan, after Eid to be exact. Inshallah ta'ala, probably be an episode or two a week. And it will be right on Telegram, and then I'll share the audio right in our Fath al Mu'een group bi'idhnillah ta'ala. And we'll go into many different topics bi'idhnillah ta'ala, inshallah ta'ala, pertaining to the things that we've been covering. He says, لِحَلِّ تَنَاوُلِ الْأَخِيرَيْنِ. He's saying that the last two, samak wal jarad, are allowed. What is he referring to? The famous hadith. أُحِلَّ لَنَا دَمَانْ وَمَيْتَتَانْ. We spoke about the daman before. I'm going to focus on the latter part of the hadith. وَمَيْتَتَانْ. السَّمَكْ وَالْجَرَد. So these two maitas were allowed to consume. Meaning if I go fishing and I pull the fish out already dead, I can eat it. A locust is the same exact thing. There's no slaughtering mechanism with them. Tamam. Because locusts, they just drop dead after a while because they have a life cycle. And fish, you could pull the fish out of the water and it just dies right away. And some of them will last a little bit longer. So there's no mechanism for dhabh, for slaughtering. Therefore, you're allowed to consume it even if it dies in any other way. Tamam? وَأَمَّا الْآدَمِ فَلِقَوْلِهِ تَعَالَى وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. And if the Shafi'iyya also understood from this ayah and ahadith that the semen is tahir, and therefore asl al-adami, the origins of a human would be clean, then the ending of the human would also be what? Would also be clean. So he says, وَقَضِيَّةُ التَّكْرِيمِ, meaning, and the takreem that we are understanding from this verse, the understanding from the word karramna, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, وَلَقَدِ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. That means we have honored the sons of Adam. Honored how? What is the honoring here? Is that there's no original sin because the sons of Adam are honored. They start from a clean starting point, tahara. And when they die, they are respected, and breaking the bone of the dead is like breaking the bone of the living. That's the takreem. They are honored from birth to death, and after death as well. They are buried correctly. Even the kuffar, when we say we don't bury them in our cemetery, it doesn't mean we're not going to bury them, period. Tamam? He says, وَقَضِيَةُ التَّكْرِيمِ أَلَّا يُحْكَمَ بِنَجَاسَتِهِمْ بِالْمَوْتِ وَغَيْرِ صَيْدٍ لَمْ تُدْرَكْ زَكَاتُهُ. If you're going hunting, tamam, and you send your dog out, مثلا, and you get there and the animal's dead, you're fine. You even though you didn't slaughter it, it's dead. Khalas, you're still allowed to what? You're allowed to consume that. So that appears, it's in the surah. The technical breakdown of that surah is that, let's say you're hunting ducks, and you send your bow and arrow, and you send your dog after you send your net or your trap, and you get there and the dog has its mouth around its neck and it's dead. There was no real dhabh, or you got there and the dog is standing there and the animal is dead. يعني yakfi, that's halal, because there's a hadith that sets this scenario aside. So even though technically speaking it looks like that we would consider that animal to be a mayta, but because the sharia allowed it, it gets the exception. Therefore that which technically is a mayta is no longer treated as a mayta. So that's another exception. وَجَنِينِ مُذَكَّاتٍ مَاتَ بِذَكَاتِهَا. When you slaughter a cow or a sheep, and then you skin it, and then you cut it open to clean out the intestines, and you see it was pregnant with a baby cow or baby sheep, and it's dead because the mother was slaughtered and it was in there long enough to suffocate and die. That baby, again, technically speaking, it suffocated and it died. Tamam? Even though there's that technicality that would make it a mayta, because its mother was slaughtered correctly, it takes the ruling of its mother, and therefore that scenario is treated as what? As halal. Even though technically it looks like it's a mayta, that animal is mubah to consume, it's not mayta. So these are the exceptions to things that look like mayta but are not mayta. Mumtaz? He says, وَيَحِلُّ أَكْلُ دُودِ مَأْكُولٍ مَعَهُ. You get a nice fresh apple and you take a big bite in it, and after you're done crunching, you're going to take another one and you realize there was a hole or two in the apple and it looked like it was fresh, but the worm is not there anymore. Because the possibility here is that you ate it. That's okay. That's not najis. Tamam? هذا لا ينجس. And the same thing in any other fruit as well, just using the apple as an example. وَلَا يَجِبُ غَسْلُ نَحْوِ الْفَمِ مِنْهُ. And you don't have to wash your mouth afterwards. Well, wait a minute, can I eat worms? No, you can't. Allah. So if I can't eat worms, how come I can eat this worm? Because this is an exception. This scenario is an exception to the rule. Tamam? Just check our time. No, we're good. وَنَقَلَ فِي الْجَوَاهِرِ. الْجَوَاهِر by who? By Al-Qamuli. عن الأصحاب, from our ashab, who said, you cannot eat fish that has been salted and the insides have not been cleaned out, meaning from the intestines, the filth, droppings, and so on. So let me see, how many people are with us here today? Bismillah. Okay, who knows fisikh? You can put a hands up, or you can just do a heart thing or one of those weird emojis. Who knows fisikh? me see if we can see the chat. No. Labas. Okay, no one's answering. It's all right. In Egypt, there's this pickled fish called fasikh, where they clean the insides and they leave it in a barrel with salt. It's basically pickled fish. In the old days, this is why this is going to be significant, right? In the old days, they didn't used to clean the insides. They would just throw the whole fish into a barrel of salt, and by time, a few weeks later, after they pop it open and they get it out, the salt itself is pitch black because of all the blood and the intestines leaking out onto the salt, and then they would eat it. Well, that, according to the Shafi'i, is considered what? Najis. Now, today, alhamdulillah, they clean out the insides. He says, وَظَاهِرُهُ لَا فَرْقَ بَيْنَ كَبِيرِهِ وَصَغِيرِهِ. The way that in al-Jawahir it's worded that you must clean out its insides, it almost appears as if there's no difference between big fish and small fish like sardines. Tamam? He says, لكن ذكر الشيخان جواز أكل الصغير مع ما في جوفه لعسر تنقية ما فيه. However, the Shaykhain, Al-Rafi' and Nawawi said, eating small fish with their intestines and everything still within it, as is okay because it is going to be very difficult to clean it from insides. In other words, famous Egyptian meals like muluha, which would be similar to like sardines and things like that, would be allowed to be consumed if their insides were not clean because they're so small and tiny. However, big fish, that's not going to be allowed. They need to be cleaned out in order to be consumed and be tahir. And remember, the exception of the qullatain only applies to water, does not apply to salt. So salt is not a purifier in our madhab. The sunlight is not a purifier in our madhab. Fire is not a purifier in our madhab. The only purifier is what? Water. وَكَمُسْكِرٍ. And similarly, meaning from the najasat, is what? Something that intoxicates. A liquid, basically he's going to mention liquid in a moment. Any liquid that intoxicates is considered what? Najis. فَدَخَلَتْ الْقَطْرَةُ مِنَ الْمُسْكِرِ. Min al-muskir. Even a drip of something that intoxicates. مائع, liquid. كخمر وهي المتخذة من العنب. Like khamr, that is taken from fermented grapes, basically. وَنَبِيذٍ وَهُوَ الْمُتَّخِذُ مِنْ غَيْرِهِ. Nabidh, originally in Arabic, refers to any juice that has had a fruit that has sat in it, and the flavor of the water has changed. One of the most favorite juices to the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam was Nabidh al-Tamr. Wait, the Prophet ﷺ liked Nabidh al-Tamr? Yes. Nabidh al-Tamr has two stages. One stage from the moment you put the dates in, you crush the dates with your hands in water, up until 3 days. Here this is halal. Past the 3-day mark, this is haram. This is now an intoxicant. Beforehand, it's basically just like flavored water. Tamam. It depends on the type of grape. If it's a hard tamr, tamam, then it's just going to remain as flavored water, and the dates will eventually get soft, and you can chew on them, the dates afterwards. If they are soft dates, like ajwa and things like that, and you crush the date in the water, if you give it 3 hours, the entirety of the water turns into almost like a flavored juice. You don't even need to add sugar to it. It almost tastes like a carob or things of that nature. Tamam. Now, up until, before you get to that 3 days, it's considered tahir. Once it crosses now and becomes a muskir, and therefore becomes what? It becomes najis. It becomes najis. وخرج بالمائع نحو البنج والحشيش. نعم. Any plant or any other substance really that intoxicates in any way, in any form, whatever it might be, plant, non-liquid chemical, is all considered what? Is all considered tahir. It's not considered najis. وَتَطْهُرُ خَمْرٌ. Now, the khamr and certain types of nabiz, they can become purified. But I'm not allowed to purify them myself. It has to happen naturally. وَتَطْهُرُ خَمْرٌ تَخَلَّلَتْ بِنَفْسِهَا. So if I take grapes and I put it in water and I seal it and I leave it for a period of time, it changes first to a wine. If I leave it a little bit longer, it changes to what? It changes to vinegar. Tamam? It can become clean as long as من غير مصاحبة عين أجنبية لها. That I did not add a foreign substance in. What kind of foreign substance? Back in the old days, you'd put an onion in. So you get a barrel, and you crush grapes, and you add water. Before you close it, you take an onion, a yellow onion, not a red, not a sweet. Some people say the sweet onion, but based upon all my research, it's always a yellow onion. Regardless, you peel it, cut off the ends, and you peel it, and you put it into the barrel, and then you close it. The onion makes the process happen quicker. Here's your problem, why this is going to be rejected for us. It is because the onion, once the liquid changed to khamr, would absorb, because onions absorb. Then when it changes to khal, now this khamr in the onion is going to make the khal, the vinegar, najis. And therefore that can't be allowed. وَإِن لَمْ تُؤَثِّرْ فِي التَّخْلِيلِ كَالْحَصَاتِ. Sometimes they would put rocks in the bottom of the barrel, in the liquid, in order to keep the barrel from moving or anyone touching it or trying to transport it out. That too, they consider it a problem as well. But now, if all of this happens on its own, tamam, like just say that you had an uncle and you inherited from him and you went to his home and in his basement you found a barrel, you pop it open and it smells like vinegar. You ask around, oh, he used to make wine. Wal'adu billah, I'm just using this as a random example. All right, can you use it? You can use it now, but he couldn't have used it if he had left it intentionally to become vinegar. Because we're not allowed to make vinegar that way. If it happens on its own, alhamdulillah. I can't actually intentionally do that. And why? Because we have this in a hadith. A family came to the Prophet ﷺ after the khamr was made haram and said to him, we had a barrel and it turned into vinegar. Can we use it? He said, yes. Another person came and said, Ya Rasulullah, I have a barrel of wine. Can I change it into vinegar? He said, no. How do I make vinegar then? I use the process of the mother of vinegar. Tamam. He's not really going to cover it precisely, but he's going to refer to it, but that's pretty much it. But the way that it works is that you get a barrel of your juice, your grapes, and your water, and you add vinegar to it. And that's how you industrialize production of vinegar. Tamam. Is that you just add vinegar to your juice. Tamam. It's called the mother of vinegar process, meaning the vinegar will make the other liquid what? Vinegar as well. He says, وَيَتْبَعُهَا, that means if it happens on its own, وَيَتْبَعُهَا فِي الطَّهَارَةِ الدَّنُ وَإِن تَشَرَّبَ مِنْهَا أَوْ غَلَتْ فِيهِ وَارْتَفَعَتْ بِسَبَبِ الْغَلَيَانِ ثُمَّ نَزَلَتْ. ممتاز. Back in the old days, can still somewhat apply to us today, but depending on how it's done. If you're using a wooden barrel, tamam, the wood will absorb some. The lid, which is also wood, will absorb some. Now, the fluid, once it's sealed in, will rise, it will go up and down on its own for the different chemical reactions that are happening. He's calling it غليان because it almost looks like it's boiling, تمام, when it's fermenting and so on. تمام. He's saying, so يعني if it happened on its own and we popped it open and now it's we're going to consider those, because the liquid is here, but then you have some an empty part of the barrel and then the lid. Well, they got it on it, we're going to consider all of that tahir along with it, if it all happened on its own. تمام. Even if it soaks some up, we're going to consider it all tahir. أما إذا ارتفعت بلا غليان بل بفعل فاعل فلا تطهر. But if someone forces it to move around, no, then we're not going to consider it clean, because we already said, if you are interfering in the process, if you're doing it, then it's not acceptable. تمام. وإن غمر المرتفع قبل جفافه أو بعده بخمر أخرى على الأوجه كما جزم به شيخنا. Meaning, in other words, bottom line is, if the vinegar smells like vinegar but the lid smells like khamr, you'll still consider it طاهر. تمام. بلا إشكال. والذي اعتمده شيخنا المحقق عبد الرحمن بن زياد أنها تطهر إن غمر المرتفع قبل الجفاف لا بعده. He says, Ibn Ziyad argued, he said, hold on, if that lid and the sides of the barrel, if they were, it dried from the khamr, and then the vinegar got on it, that's when we consider it clean. But if not, like if it changed into vinegar without really, without changing the khamr scene on it, then no, we're not going to say it's tahir. We're going to say they need to be washed. ثم قال لو صب خمر في إناء ثم أخرجت منه وصب فيه خمر أخرى بعد جفاف الإناء وقبل غسله لم تطهر. He's saying, here's an example, here's a scenario, right? If khamr, alcohol, is poured into a container, then it's dumped out of that container, tamam, and that container dries. We don't wash it, it just dries out. So you look at it, you don't see anything. And then you pour a different khamr in. تمام? He says, وَصُبَّ فِيهِ خَمْرٌ أُخْرى مَعَ جَفَافِ الْإِنَاءِ وَقَبْلَ غَسْلِهِ لَمْ تَطْهُرْ. Well, لَمْ تَطْهُرْ, because you'll still need to wash it. تمام? Or what is the illah here? And many of the fuqaha here, they argued on these details, because okay, in this scenario right now that Ibn Ziyad is arguing, are you saying that the drying out is doing the tathir? Ibn Hajar is saying no. He's saying, because I leave it sealed, the entirety of that which was sealed will take the same hukm. But Ibn Ziyad, he's separating it from the sealed scene, and he's saying, well, look at it like this. If I had a container and I poured khamr into it, then I dumped it out and I let it sit, it dried, and then I poured other khamr in it, was it clean in the first place? He'll say, no, it needs to be rinsed out. I didn't wash it. Look what he says. وَقَبْلَ غَسْلِهِ. There was no washing. Tamam. So when you start putting their suwar next to each other, their scenarios, you see they're really talking about different things. Like, what is Ibn Ziyad trying to get at exactly? He's trying to say is that if it didn't move around, but khamr got onto the lid and the sides of the barrel, method, okay, and the vinegar didn't get there, and those sides, the lid and the sides, they dried, but you can still smell the khamr, but it's dried out. Is that tahir? Ibn Ziyad be like, no, that's not tahir. That needs to be washed and cleaned. Sah. Technically, he's right. However, the way that this process takes place is that the barrel needs to be sealed. completely like airtight. So Ibn Hajar is looking at it from that standpoint. Ibn Ziyad is looking at it from the technical breakdown. And this happens a lot between the fuqaha. تمام. He says لم تطهر وإن تخللت بعد نقلها منه في إناء آخر. وإن تخللت بعد نقلها منه في إناء آخر. But now this khamr now has changed into vinegar. But that scenario would be problematic not because of the ina, but because someone poured around khamr trying to get it to turn into vinegar. قال والدليل على كون الخمر خلا الحموضة في طعمها وإن لم توجد نهاية الحموضة وإن قذفت بالزبد. نعم. How can you tell you pop up in the barrel? How do you know that it's khal, it's vinegar, and it's not khamr? He's saying with the humuda, the acidic flavor that's in it. Tamam. And it doesn't need to be extreme, it just needs to be obvious. That's all. وَإِنْ قَذَفَتْ بِالزَّبَدِ يعني even if it has bubbles still in it. Because what happens during the fermentation thing is that bubbles come up at the top. Tamam. Check our time real quick. 51. Let's cover this part right here. Yeah, we still have time to do this. ويطهر جلد نجس أو نجس بالموت باندباغ نقاه بحيث لا يعود إليه نتن ولا فساد لو نقع في الماء. ممتاز. So if I have jild of an animal, this jild was taken off of a mayta. I found the cow, it dropped dead for some reason. I don't know what it is. Old age. Okay, mumtaz. I can take the hide, but remember, it's najis because this is mayta. What do I need to do? I need to do tanning. Technically, I'm supposed to be doing tanning to all hides, all right, because it's the only way to use it. But right now, let's focus on the mayta. That mayta, normally I'm not allowed to touch it. However, the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba were walking down the street one day, and they see a mayta on the side of the road. Ya Rasul, he's like, "What is this?" They said, "Ya Rasul, it's a mayta." He said, "How come you have not taken its hide and benefited from it?" Tamam. They reiterated the point that it's mayta. He said, "Ayyuma ihabin qad dubigh faqad tahur." Any hide, animal hide that goes through dibagh is not considered clean. Now, this is the second type of things that are najis within themselves. Khamr is najis within itself. But we just found out that there is a method that can take place that if it does take place, it becomes what? It becomes clean, turns into vinegar. The same thing with the mayta's hide. It becomes clean if I put it through the process of tanning. What's the process of tanning? It is me using certain chemicals, right, that burn away the flesh and the fat off of the skin of the animal. And then therefore I can use it in making things as leather basically afterwards. In the old days, they used to use bird droppings mixed, and it would sit for a while, in pomegranate skin. So you get your pomegranate skin and you crush it down and you break it down to very small pieces, and then you collect bird droppings, okay, and you mix it into it. And you make this into a big solution, and then you put the whole entire hide in it and you let it sit there for several days. Then you take it out and you hang it up, tamam, so that it can continue dropping off and burning away any fat. If I put the jild of the mayta, tamam, through this process, and there's no more fat or flesh left on it, then it's considered what? It's considered tahir, and I can use it. It's not najis anymore. Before that, it was najas al-ayn. Now I can use it. This is a form of istihala. Istihala is when a substance changes from state A to state B. For us in the Shafi'i school, it's not only in the name, it's not limited to a name change, or it looks completely different, like khamr to khal, alcohol to vinegar, or Here, it doesn't, I mean, it was animal skin to animal skin. There's nothing really changing. It's just the hukm that's changing through this process. Istihala is a limited concept to whatever the Sharia allowed. It does not apply to anything, and therefore, getting jello that has pig gelatine in it, even though it's in the form of a powder, and no one looks at jello and says, oh, here's swine. Other schools will say, oh, now it's no longer swine and therefore I can consume it. We say no. We say no. We don't believe, no. Istihala is an exception to the rule, requires a license and permission from the Sharia. And without that, I can't just go and apply istihala to whatever I want. As a matter of fact, this is scary because the Prophet ﷺ said, you will see as you get closer to the hour, and this is not to be used against Malikiya that have the other opinion. I'm just saying that for us, we look at this with great caution because the Prophet ﷺ, you see, as you get closer to the hour, people will name things other than their true names so that way they can use them. So for the Shafi'iyya, we see istihala as something that's tawqifi. The Sharia has to tell me I'm allowed to do this. If it does not, then there is no istihala. And that way, when people say, "Oh, the alcohol is now with perfume, and therefore it's perfume, it's not alcohol." If that's the case, then how come people do drink it and get intoxicated from it? Oh, but they say they'll get sick. Yes, you water it down. You change the percentages. That's just basic one-on-one how alcohol works. I mean, if you drank raw alcohol, right, you could kill yourself. It's a percentage game, right, and dilution game. So for the Shafi'i, we're like, well, it's still there. The alcohol is still there. Chemically, by eyes, it's still there. You know it's there. It's stated that it's there. It's one of the ingredients. So just come and act like it's not there, actively, because now it's called perfume. We cannot use that. That's not how istihala works for us as Shafi'iyya. So for us, it's limited to certain things. Namely, you'll see most of the ulama will just mention the two things: the khamr changing into khal and animal hide.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Afwan. The app for some reason did not work, so I just walked over to my computer. Well, I mean, we're going to stop here bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, and inshallah ta'ala we'll pick up next in our next class next week, inshallah ta'ala. And for those of you that attend our Shahawi nights on Saturdays, inshallah ta'ala, we'll get back to that. Bi'idhnillah, I'm going to make an announcement too in the room later on today. But inshallah on the 28th, we'll be getting back to our Saturday gatherings for our Shawwal gatherings, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. We might actually start reading slowly along the way parts of Riyadh al-Salihin. So I'll let everyone go for now. وأقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله تعالى لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.